My guest this week is Adam Burstein, who is the Technical Director for Strategic and Critical Materials in the Office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Base Policy within the US DoD, the Department of Defense. In his capacity, Adam leads DoD's efforts to secure and manage critical mineral supply chains essential for defense industrial applications. This has gained significant traction recently, given the increasing nexus between defense and critical minerals, driven by a strong US national security imperative. In this Power Plays interview, which was recorded at our Giga USA conference in Washington, D.C., we discussed several topics, including the US critical mineral needs for military applications, the merits of stockpiling and price support mechanisms, as well as the need to build integrated ex-China permanent magnet supply chains with US allies. Thanks, Adam, for joining us today at the Giga USA conference in Washington, D.C. Not too far from you because you're based here, working for the US Department of Defense. And specifically, you sit in the office of the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Industrial Policy. Perhaps to start, could you shed more light on your role within the US Department of Defense, also your background? Because one of the big focuses of today, the big aim of today, is to shed more light on the US Department of Defense role within the US critical mineral policy landscape.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Brian. So start off with a little bit about my background. So I'm actually a geologist originally by training. Moved into the private sector after college as a geologist. And then a few years later was hired on as a hydrogeologist into the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Did a lot of research and assessment of global geologies through that, and then somehow found my way to remote sensing and mapping, which took me to Afghanistan and Iraq and around the world. And then I made my way back through the headquarters of the Department of the Army back to the critical minerals sector.
Okay.
Through the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Policy, and now the Office of the Secretary of Defense for Acquisition and Sustainment, into the Office, as you said, of Industrial Base Policy.
Okay, interesting. And perhaps I think it's worth for our audience to shed more light. I mean, there is a growing, especially in Europe, there is a growing narrative of the importance of critical minerals for the defense, for defense applications. I mean, this narrative or this policy aim has existed for a long time, I think, in the US. But could you perhaps tell more about, which minerals are needed for which defense application to underline the importance of the critical mineral space for the Army, for the defense industry in general?
Yeah, so there's no shortage, and we often carry around a periodic table with us and highlight the different elements and their different applications to industrial-based sectors and how that pertains to various defense applications and weapon systems. What you would notice if I had that chart in front of me is that the vast majority of the elements on that chart are lit up in different colors, representing the different sectors where they are needed. Whether that's energy storage and batteries, which is what brings us, of course, to Giga USA today.
Yep.
Whether that is for microelectronics, for castings and forgings, or for really advanced and exquisite technologies for sensors, actuators, motors, et cetera, that are radar, things of that nature. You'll really see that we need just about everything that's on the periodic table. And frankly, a lot of what is on the periodic table is currently at risk to our supply chains. So if you look at, for example, the Department of the Interior's list of critical minerals, they generally assess minerals two different ways. One is by the need for national and economic security, and the other is by the risk of that supply chain broadly. And I think there are currently 50 minerals, which are really elements on that list right now, which just gives you some sense of their importance to us. But everything from a bullet which requires antimony, which of course is a hot topic right now.
Given the export
to
restrictions.
infrared optics that require germanium, just across the scope of all, the thousands of weapon systems that we have. I mean, we're talking about tens of thousands of parts and components that use critical minerals, that our warfighters need to fight and win and deter.
Well, super interesting, fascinating. And perhaps returning to your department, the US Department of Defense, just in general as an organization, historically, but also now, what has been the role and what is the role currently of the US Department of Defense in the US critical mineral policy landscape? So how does the department contribute to the aims of critical mineral supply security, industrial competitiveness, and so forth?
Yeah, so really I'd say that there are sort of three key areas where that happens. One is informing decision makers and leaders. So obviously national security concerns are of paramount importance across governments. So just making sure that our political leadership and other leadership is aware of the challenges that we're having, the importance to national security of critical minerals supply chains. That, first and foremost is probably one of our responsibilities. Number two, looking more internal to the Department of Defense, is our ability to shape our own policies, especially for acquisition, for example, to make sure that we are sending the right demand signals to industry for the defense industrial base, to make sure that we can still and continuously get the materials that we need for our national security. And then third really is bringing to bear the authorities that we have in DoD to try to fix the supply chains where there are risks and gaps. So that's what I would say.
And in terms of tools, I believe in terms of prioritization, investments, an important one is the Defense Production Act, right? That was being used a couple of times on the previous administration. But can you shed more light? And can you tell more information about the tool, what has been used for, which investments have been supported, and so forth?
Yes, absolutely. So Defense Production Act has been a key tool for many years, but really we've seen its importance since COVID really come more to the fore. So with the Defense Production Act, essentially with a presidential determination that there is a national security risk, that the Department of Defense or government.
That's an important precondition then. There needs to be a national security risk involved in it.
Yes, there needs to be a waiver granted by the president, really, which we have right now for critical minerals. So that waiver is granted, and then we are able to invest in critical minerals projects. The scope and authority of the Defense Production Act, this Title III we're talking about now, really has grown over time. So we have it's called an Other Transaction Authority or Other Transaction Agreement available to us right now, which gives us a lot of flexibility in contracting and allows us to provide purchases through grants, through loans, through loan commitments, through purchase commitments, and several other mechanisms. So it's really a very powerful tool. And frankly, we're not just bound by the Defense Production Act tool either. With the Department of Defense, we have something called the Industrial Base Fund, which is another appropriation, another mechanism. Usually it's research and development dollars, but that can go toward workforce and helping to capitalize projects and bring them to fruition. And now we have the Office of Strategic Capital as well, which is essentially a credit bank that can make loans and loan
commitments. Are there specific thresholds for that? I mean, a maximum amount of money that can be provided for specific projects? Or?
There are across the board. Really, for DPA, it's more of a I think it's an annual cap.
Yeah.
And then we have to go back to Congress for more authorities. For the Office of Strategic Capital, just like most credit programs, there are certain thresholds that need to be met or maintained in order to keep the money flowing.
Okay, interesting. And that means a lot of involvement of the private sector, right, in forging public-private partnerships.
It does. So that's key. So I'm glad you brought that up. Yeah. There's no expectation here that the government is going to solve our problems. What we are hoping is that the demand signal that we are providing with these grants and loans and other authorities then de-risks companies, and ultimately, hopefully, we think de-risk supply chains,
which is a major challenge now in the upstream sector the upstream segment of the supply chain, because unlocking private capital has been challenging.
It is, and that's exactly what we're looking for, is to de-risk private investment, which of course really is the key to all of this.
And in terms of regional focus, I believe through the DPA, the US has supported some projects in Canada. Has there been any support for other projects beyond North America or not?
So there hasn't been yet. DPA is limited to domestic sources.
Okay.
Domestic sources now include Canada, as you mentioned, has frankly for over 25 years.
Yeah.
But also Australia and the United Kingdom. We only just invested in our first companies in Canada last year.
Okay.
We are hoping it does not take us 25 years, of course, to invest in companies in the UK and Australia. We're looking to accelerate that much more rapidly. We're very cognizant of the fact that we do not have all of the mineral resources here at home that we need, and therefore we need our allies and partners.
That's important to keep in mind, because there's been a strong domestic focus in the policy narrative coming from this administration, but sourcing other materials will be needed. And I guess this tool can be then a wonderful friendshoring tool then, given the resources of Australia, the rare earth element resource and so forth.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And you're right. So for example, the executive order that came out on securing domestic mineral resources, is laser focused on domestic capability. But that said, we've also seen in the news, the deal with Ukraine, talk about Greenland, the trade agreement with the United Kingdom.
Yeah.
So all of these other narratives where clearly the administration is focused on critical minerals around the world as well. So there's no doubt that there's a reshoring afoot, but also a nearshoring or friendshoring as well.
Yeah, and I think a big incentive in terms, a big geopolitical incentive to work and to bolster the U.S. critical mineral supply security has been the export restrictions that China has issued on a number of critical minerals, including the recent one on a couple of medium and heavy rare earth elements and permanent magnets. Can you perhaps shed some light on the, I guess it's very early stage. At the moment that we are recording this video, but can you perhaps shed more light in terms of early stage impacts that you've seen from a DoD perspective of these export restrictions?
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's very interesting. I talk a lot about opportunities and challenges, and the export restrictions that we've seen from China, not only for these rare earths in particular since April, but going back over the last year and a half or so, have unlocked both opportunities and challenges. Yeah. Kudos to China for playing the hand that it was dealt, and we played right into that hand. But now I think we're seeing, with this more coercive and sort of predatory behavior, I think industry and certainly government is galvanizing around a position where we need to insulate ourselves a little bit from those practices. We've seen a lot of uncertainty in prices for commodities, of course, as a result of some of these behaviors. So really what we're doing is we're looking at what opportunities exist. I mean, there are some areas where prices are going up for some commodities, and that's making it, at least in the near term, more feasible for companies to crowd in domestically, for example, and establish capabilities. Of course, there'll have to be backstops on those because we have no guarantees that the prices will stay where they are. Then there are also scenarios where prices are falling. So again, we're looking at what opportunities are available to us to create a more favorable market environment for domestic companies and global companies to, maybe shy away a little bit from Chinese influence and grow the ecosystem broadly for these materials.
Yeah, I think that's something that we always convey to clients and in presentations in one positive element. I mean, despite China's critical mineral dominance across the rare earth element supply chain, I mean, what we see is more supply diversification basically happening in other regions in the world because of these export restrictions. And in the end, it could be counterproductive, I think, for China itself. Then, I mean, as you probably know, because you told me a couple of minutes ago that you have got a lot more work since US President Trump's inauguration and his executive orders mentioning critical minerals a lot. I mean, critical minerals is a very important policy priority of this administration. I mean, there is stockpiling is often mentioned as well. So, I mean, if not mistaken, there is a legal framework in the US that allows stockpiling. But to what extent can stockpiling be, because it's framed like this, often be an important tool for supply security and again, in the defense sector?
Yeah, so we see a lot of benefit to stockpiling. Stockpiling policy falls under my portfolio. The Defense Logistics Agency is they are the ones that execute the National Defense Stockpile Program. But we see many benefits to it. First, a robust stockpile we see as a hedge, a deterrent against adversarial, economic policy or economic behavior. If we have the materials at home that we need, and we know that an adversary's behaviors are going to spark some sort of national emergency or national defense prioritization of critical minerals going to the industrial base, then presumably it acts as a deterrent because those behaviors simply don't have the desired effect when you can pull from the stockpile, and at least from a national security perspective, help the industrial base along.
Yeah.
So not only a deterrent, but it continues to send that demand signal to especially qualified suppliers to continue producing.
So how does it work in practice? Have you been stockpiling minerals before? Are you currently stockpiling minerals? And just looking at the future, which minerals is the US government planning to stockpile in practice?
So I'll refer again to that Department of the Interior critical minerals list, and the vast majority of those minerals are included in what are considered strategic and critical materials by the Department of Defense. So if you look at, you mentioned legal framework before, if you look at the Stockpiling Act, which is under U.S. Code Title 50, going all the way back to 1939, it tells us originally what we can stockpile, and then how we ask for permission to stockpile things now, and what the conditions are for coming up with those requirements. But most of the things on that critical minerals list, plus some additional minerals and materials, are currently being stockpiled in some form or soon will be. And essentially it's built off of that strategic and critical minerals list, or materials list, which is available online.
It's basically your Bible then, to use this.
Amongst others.
Okay. And to what extent can this be, stockpiling as a tool, to what extent can this be used as a price support mechanism?
So it's actually within the statute, within the law that says that this can't be used for economic or budgetary purposes. So from that perspective, you might look at some other form of stockpiling, either industry, private stockpiles, or in the future perhaps some critical mineral reserve of the United States, for example, that operates akin to the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, or maybe what used to be the government's helium reserve, for example, to be more of an economic stabilization tool. But we're more of a break glass in case of emergency, for defense needs only application. That said, something that we're trying to get better at, move into more, is purchase commitments and offtake agreements.
Yeah.
Now, again, this would be to fulfill the requirements of the stockpile itself. So it's not looking at U.S. commercial markets broadly, but it can send potentially a
demand
cohesive, consistent demand signal over a period of time that might help, economic stabilization.
But do you foresee any legal changes allowing stockpiling for commercial reasons or not?
There's a lot of discussion in Congress about something like this. There are a lot of challenges with doing it, frankly. Critical minerals are critical for a reason. These supply chains are generally small, and they're needed by industry right now for a whole host of applications, both national security and commercial. So what happens when you stand up a reserve and now you're competing with the commercial market to stockpile that material? I think that's a serious consideration.
It's even now mentioned in the deep sea mining space, where you would stockpile the nodules, which is also, I think, an interesting area.
It is.
Yeah. Then perhaps the last question, you mentioned offtakes, and offtakes have been mentioned a lot in my discussions with US government people, as well as in the executive orders, because offtakes and getting the raw material feedstock in the US to support processing is key, right? So, but to what extent is the DoD involved in this, or can be involved in the future, perhaps?
So we do have authorities for purchase commitments, effectively offtake agreements. But again, it goes to what requirement are you satisfying? Really one of the very few uses that Department of Defense has in terms of purchasing raw materials is for the stockpile. There's some areas within the organic industrial base, mostly in munitions, armaments, that sort of thing, where we have some of that as well. But by and large, it is industry and the defense industrial base that is driving the demand for these materials, and at multiple levels deep within the sub-tier supplier level. So it gets into the question of how much does the department, how much does the U.S. government want to be an off-taker if the vast majority of those materials probably have to get into the hands of industry anyway. So I think the bigger challenge is, how do we encourage industry to develop those offtake agreements, given a consistent demand signal by DoD, by Department of Energy, by whomever.
In terms of potential to contribute to overall critical mineral supply security, I see a lot of dots that can be connected, because you got the public-private partnerships that we mentioned, you got offtakes, you got stockpiling, the US government potentially as a public purchaser of minerals. So there's a lot of potential, I see.
There are a lot of opportunities here. It's, I'm hopeful in this space.
Okay. Thanks, Adam, for your insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you.